When Philip opened his eyes, he was not in the dungeon, but in the old forest of his dreams, dabbled with shadows and peppered in fallen leaves. Philip sat up. His arms didn't ache, and the wounds from his fight with Maleficent's minions were gone. He took a deep breath and reveled in the bright scent of fresh grass and old trees. Maleficent's curse shouldn't have gotten to Briar Rose. There had been no spindles in the cottage, and the fairies pretending to be her aunts had almost certainly not allowed them near her. She had been safe and sound in the cottage until dusk. So even if the curse was destined to come true, how had it happened? Surely her aunts hadn't dragged her to the castle at sunset and dumped everything on her at once. I might have pricked my finger to escape that, he muttered. All right, Philip, you messed everything up. You need to get up and face it all, and fix it. Briar Rose would be here. She had to be. They would have however long they needed to figure a way out of Maleficent's web, since she was cursed and he was captured. Or she would be furious at him and his mistakes, that dreaming would become far worse than his real life for the first time. Philip pulled himself up on a tree. The forest seemed different, lighter and brighter despite the canopy being as thick as ever. The leaves felt more real between his fingers, and the thick bark didn't crumble away with age. Philip walked down the trees, letting his fingers trail across each one, and frowned as he passed a large rock covered in moss. That was where he had sat before the thorn wall became a hedge maze, which meant the wall should have been close. But the thorns, wall, and hedge maze were gone entirely for the first time. Briar Rose, he shouted. Philip! Her voice was softer than he had ever heard it, raspy with sleep, but he couldn't tell where it was coming from. She was nowhere in sight. Oh, good. I had hoped this would happen. Hoped? He spun around and shoved his way through a thicket. Where are you? I honestly don't know, she said. I have a better question, though. Where are you in the waking world? He sighed and followed the sound of her voice. Maleficent's castle. That doesn't make my plan less useful, said Briar Rose. How did you get there? Maleficent, he hesitated, uncertain as to how much she knew. Well, she was waiting for me at your cottage because I'm supposed to be because I'm Princess Aurora and she thinks you're my true love? You don't have to dance around it, Prince Philip. Learning who I was betrothed to, and who I was cursed by were all part of my birthday surprise, Briar Rose said with a laugh. Imagine my surprise, Prince Philip, when I was told that I was betrothed to a prince whose name escapes me. And now imagine my horror because of how sad I was. Prince Philip to be my betrothed unknowingly to this prince. Oh, I also, surprise, have a true love who is supposed to wake me from this curse. Imagine that, Your Highness. He winced and followed her voice around an outcropping of rocks. Sorry, we had only just met and I didn't want to add betrothed prince to the list of things about me that might complicate. His voice trailed off as he caught sight of her. Briar Rose looked like Princess Aurora now. The crown he had seen her wear in Maleficent's image had carried over to the dream, and carefully curled strands of golden hair held it in place. The blue skirt of her gown was spread out around her, the silk-like water spilling across the grass, and there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there in the forest. It was as if she was scared to breathe and mess up the artwork that had been made of her. She blinked up at him with tired eyes. That expression, the one of exasperation and affection when she saw him, was the same as when they had met in the woods, and far more beautiful than any silk or jewels. I feel sleepy, even here, said Briar Rose with a yawn. What's happening in the real world? I'm sorry, he said. I don't know much. Maleficent found me when I went to the cottage in the glen to see you." Briar Rose groaned. "My aunts made me leave. They broke the news about who I am and then dragged me to the castle. And then, after I had learned of the curse and had cried over news of my upcoming marriage to Prince Philip, I thought of you. How many nobles are there in Artwine and Altor named Philip? How many who might be targeted by a trio of evil fairies, do you think?" She gestured from herself to him, and he winced. "Yeah, sorry about that," he said. "I like that you didn't know I was a prince, and I wasn't thrilled about the betrothal. I was hoping it would solve itself." She snorted. "Well, glad that worked out how you wanted." "Considering this solved is very optimistic of you." Philip ignored the flutter in his chest. She hadn't asked to break the betrothal yet, and sat down next to her. "I am sorry about leaving it all out. It makes things make more sense," said Briar Rose. "I can't really blame you for wanting to keep some things private when our lives have apparently been public knowledge since birth. You know, for years I asked what happened to my parents, and my aunts just said that I had to be raised by them. Then suddenly I was a princess, and betrothed, and cursed. I felt so bad for hating it, but I did." "You're the one whose world got turned upside down, and you're the only one among us cursed," he said. "Exactly!" She stretched out her legs, her bare toes peeking out from beneath her gown. The golden cloth slippers discarded a few steps away made him smile. "I shouldn't feel bad at all, because my aunts never prepared me for emotional upheaval, only how to organize seating arrangements for court dinners and how to play the harp." "You could play the harp?" "Phil, please," she drawled. "We're betrothed. You should know me better by now." He flushed, cringing at how swiftly his cheeks heated, and tugged at his shirt. She grabbed his hand. "Relax," she squeezed his hand. "I won't hold you to the marriage if you don't want it." "That's kind of you," he said, his heart sinking at the idea that she wanted out of their marriage. Philip swallowed. He couldn't assume things about her again. He had to be reasonable. "Earlier, to avoid the betrothal to Princess Aurora, I told my father I was marrying this peasant girl I met in the woods today." "Oh, another marriage I was unaware of." She glared up at him, but he could see the quirk of her lips. "I don't recall you proposing." Embarrassment flooded through Philip, but he took a deep breath and pressed on to try to determine how she felt about him. "Simply telling my father that I was falling for a mysterious peasant girl wouldn't get me out of my betrothal, so I had to exaggerate." She stared up at him, face utterly unreadable, and said, "Maleficent told you that you were my true love." Philip swallowed. "She did." Briar Rose kept staring, as if she was waiting for something, but Philip had no idea what it could possibly be. Panic and humiliation burned through him. "Well, I only told my father that I planned to marry a peasant because I knew it would infuriate him," said Philip quickly. He watched Briar Rose's expression carefully, but she gave nothing away. "When I got to Altor, our fathers were drinking and singing and playing games." He sucked on his teeth and shrugged. "And worse than them not preparing for your return or Maleficent's, they had planned our whole lives. My father had a castle built for us to live in with plenty of room for a lot of children. The way they talked about us made me angry." "Great. I wanted another reason to be furious," she mumbled, and dropped her cheek onto his shoulder. He willed his cheeks to not turn pink at the touch. "Marrying for spite is better than marrying because our parents demand it." That gave him hope, but he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Agreed." Philip tucked his nose against her hair and said, "I have never liked you more." "You've never liked me." "Exactly. My opinion of you is eternally increasing," Philip said, a silly grin spreading across his face. "I have some larger concerns about the nature of gifts and fate, but admittedly, our parents are extremely concerning," she sighed. "But you know what I'm the most concerned about?" The curse that wasn't even my fault had taken over both of our lives. And Maleficent's, honestly, said Philip. She's planning to drag this out for over a century. Briar Rose stared up at him, blinking slowly, and he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, unable to help himself. What? Philip asked. Maleficent's plan is so confusing, Briar Rose said. She's so intent on upsetting me. It's not like my parents will be around to see me heartbroken in 100 years. But how did the curse even happen? He asked, and removed his arm from around her waist. I know there was no stopping it, but where did you even find a spindle? Oh, I pricked my finger on purpose. Philip opened his mouth, shock stealing his voice, and she laughed. Maleficent found me in the castle, and she did something to me with magic. It made me go into this strange room with a spinning wheel. I could have fought it, I think. I felt like I could have, but you told me curses always come true, so I didn't fight her, said Briar Rose, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. There was no point. If curses always come true, I had to let it happen. Better it be on my own terms than on hers, and I knew that I would fall into a cursed sleep. I was hopeful that meant I would wake up here and be able to speak to, or at least hear you eventually. This way, we could come up with a plan. She thinks she's winning, but she'll underestimate us. She definitely thinks we're winning, Philip said. She delivered a lovely soliloquy about how she's going to let you sleep for 100 years before allowing me to leave and try to save you. Very optimistic about your lifespan, Briar Rose said. She laughed and squeezed his hand again. Well, what are we going to do? Do? Philip asked. You're in a cursed sleep, and I'm locked in Maleficent's dungeon. And? So we just let her win? I only just got to leave the woods. Briar Rose leapt to her feet and clapped her hands, then pointed to him. She began to pace. All those years when I could have been with my family, all those years when I could have been learning about my curse and what to do, and all those years when I could have been getting to know you in the real world. I was instead stuck in a wood, learning how to rule a kingdom with a heavily redacted history so that I wouldn't discover anything about Maleficent and get suspicious. I know every possible way to greet someone of every rank, but I didn't know who I was until today. Her tone was the one that meant she was so angry she couldn't think about anything else, and Philip loved matching it to her expression. He had always known she was a pacer. How is it fair that my parents cut me off from everything and everyone for my own good, and then expected me to be the perfect willing daughter? She spun to him, hands out, and nearly bowed over from the force of her words. It's not fair, said Philip, slipping from his seat and keeping pace with her. She had been alone, and would be for so long that he couldn't let her be alone now. But to them you're their child, not a person. It was the only way he had ever been able to rationalize his father's opinion of him. Philip would always be his father's son first, and his father would always think of him like that. He wasn't a person with his own hopes and dreams, strengths and challenges. He was King Hubert's son. They're not thinking of you as Briar Rose, the young woman who is their daughter, Philip continued. They're thinking of you as Princess Aurora, the daughter they gave up, and everything they did has to be for the best, because if it's not, what was it for? So they made a mistake. She gripped his wrist and dragged him with her. Even if their intentions were good, why would they think I wouldn't be me now? Philip followed her gladly. Because they want their daughter, not me. She halted, dropping his hand, and stopped him from following her. If I could, I'd rip myself from this dream and abandon my parents in a wood for years without a word, and only a lifetime of lies to see how they like it. Do you know how much this hurts? Knowing that if I do get to meet them, I will never be able to make them understand that protecting me like they did was a self-disservice? I needed protection, but I also needed them. She swept the tears from her face and shook her head. Philip hated the anger and pain in her voice, but he had overheard so much of her life that he knew she deserved to be angry in that moment. "That's all I needed," she whispered. "Family, friends, other people who knew me. I needed the truth. They took my name from me. They took my life from me. They took me." She flexed her fingers and drew 3 steadying breaths. "You want to let them sweat for a year or two?" Philip asked, moving closer. "I can exist in the dungeon for a while. I don't mind." Briar Rose shook her head and then bit her lip. "It's tempting." "Say the word and I'll do it." "I'll sit and do nothing until you give me the thumbs up," he said, grasping her shoulders. She fiddled with the button at his collar. "You do love doing nothing." "Well, I never said I would do nothing solely for you." He reached up, untangled the crown from her hair, and tossed it aside. "However, doing nothing does have its perks. Maleficent or Eris will have to feed me, hopefully, and I can sneak some information out of them so we can actually plan. Unless your fairy godmothers had a plan for when you were cursed." "If they have a plan, they didn't share it with me," she said. "It would help if I could hear the things happening in the real world like I could before. Otherwise, I'm useless." "Hardly. Between us, you're the smart one. Once we know more and I figure out how to escape, we could come up with a more solid plan. You've never been useless, and you're not starting now. That's my job." He kissed the top of her head and then panicked, afraid that it was too much. He made a move to pull away, but she held tight to him. "You were never useless either," she whispered, a pretty blush dotting her cheeks and making Philip's heart skip. "Even if your father thinks that of you, you were always there for me." A breeze rippled over the wood. The trees were blurring, as if a fog was creeping through them. He blinked, and it didn't get better. "Oh, it looks like you're waking up," she said quickly. "Learn what you can. I'll think about ways we can get out of this, and we will save ourselves. But if my aunts, the fairies, come to you, trust them. I doubt they'll leave us both to die." "Whatever you want," he said, and suddenly it felt as if he were underwater. He looked down at her, and his vision became even hazier. I will always be there for you. Once I'm out of that cell, I will go find your true love and help you. Your voice is getting softer, like it does when you wake up. So this is the end for now." She kissed his cheek, and the dream wood waned to black. "And Philip, before you go off looking for my true love, why don't you kiss me?"